The US has some pretty specific ideas about what should and shouldn't be legal. Steroids? Schedule 3 controlled substance. Lawn darts? Banned entirely. Horse meat? Well, let's just say you won't find it at your local supermarket, or anywhere else, really. And in a couple states, you can legally buy a gun before you can legally buy a sex toy. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 things that are illegal in the US, but not abroad. 25. Anabolic steroids. Try walking into a pharmacy and asking for steroids in the US, and you'll be walking out in handcuffs. They've been classified as Schedule 3 drugs since the 90s, and unless you have a prescription, just having them can get you into real trouble. But that's not the case everywhere. In countries all over Asia, South America, and parts of Europe, you can walk into a pharmacy and buy muscle-boosting steroids like they're cold meds. That gap has created a whole thing now where bodybuilders take steroid vacations overseas to go and stock up. The US took its hard stance after all the doping scandals in sports, especially in baseball, cycling, and track, where steroid abuse made headlines. Other countries never really followed suit, and in a lot of places, they still haven't. 24. Blackcurrant berries. For the biggest part of the 20th century, growing blackcurrants in the US was actually illegal. Not because the berries were toxic or anything, but because they could carry a fungus that threatened white pine trees, and back then, protecting timber meant everything. The federal ban kicked in around 1912 and was serious enough to wipe blackcurrants off the shelves and out of gardens completely. By the time it got passed down to the States in the 60s, most of the country had already forgotten they existed. However, in Europe, blackcurrants were blended into juice, spread on toast, and even turned into booze. The UK still grows them by the ton. Today, restrictions remain on the books in a few US states, unless you're planting rust-resistant varieties. 23. Lawn darts. If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, well, there's a good chance you remember lawn darts. Those big, heavy metal-tipped darts you'd launch across the yard into a plastic ring. Well, unfortunately, like a lot of the things that went for entertainment or toys back then, they weren't all that safe, and people were getting impaled. They caused dozens of injuries and at least 3 child deaths. So by 1988, the government stepped in and said, yeah, maybe backyard javelins aren't the best idea. They became illegal to sell, and families were told to throw them out. Canada followed with a partial ban, but other countries took a softer approach. In the UK, for example, stores stopped carrying them, but the game was never formally outlawed. One British company, Crown Darts UK, actually kept selling them online for years, and diehard US fans were still getting their hands on them through online orders. The Consumer Product Safety Commission finally caught on in 2020 and issued a federal recall, shutting down shipments and putting an end to the game once and for all. 22. Sassafras Oil. Sassafras oil is root beer's original secret ingredient. It gave the drink that sharp, earthy flavor before anyone thought to bottle it with foam and fizz. But there's a reason you don't see it in the ingredients list anymore. In 1960, the FDA banned Safrole, the main compound in sassafras, after lab tests linked it to liver cancer in rats. That shut the door on traditional sassafras teas, homemade root beer, and even old herbal remedies that used the bark. Even so, saffrole-heavy oils and spice blends stayed in use in Southeast Asia and parts of the Caribbean. In some European markets, small-batch distillers were actually making sarsaparilla and herbal extracts with it well into the 2000s. 21. Drop-side cribs. Drop-side cribs used to be everywhere. They had a sliding rail on one side so parents could reach in more easily, which seemed convenient enough until dozens of accidents started piling up. Babies were getting trapped, suffocated, and in some cases, killed. The US decided that convenience wasn't worth the risk. By 2011, manufacturing, selling, and even donating them became illegal. But they never fully disappeared overseas. In places like the UK and other parts of Europe, you can still find drop-side cribs for sale. These days, though, most parents are leaning towards more modern designs. Not really because of the bans, but because newer models are safer, more comfortable, and often double as playpens or bassinets. 20. Konjac jelly cups. In 2001, the FDA banned imports of bite-sized Konjac jelly candies after they were linked to the deaths of at least 2 kids in the US. The problem was the texture. These jellies are made with Konjac gum, which doesn't break down like regular gelatin. Kids can choke on them if they swallow them whole, and the FDA calls the risk serious, since even the Heimlich maneuver often doesn't work. The US pulled them from the shelves and stopped them at the border, but mini jelly cups kept selling across Asia for years. And in some places like Hong Kong, serious bans have only started being discussed in recent years. 19. Video game console mod chips. Modding your PlayStation or Xbox to play pirated or imported games in the US can land you in serious legal trouble. Mod chips, small pieces of hardware that bypass a console's copy protection, are banned under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Selling or even installing them can get you sued, fined, or worse. Other countries have taken a different approach. In 2005, Australia's High Court ruled that mod chips were legal because they let consumers play games they'd legally imported. European courts were divided for years too, with some siding with mod chip sellers until stricter EU copyright rules narrowed the loopholes. In practice, a gamer in Brazil or Spain might be able to buy one without much fuss, while a US gamer could get hit with a lawsuit just for installing one. 18. The 25-year import rule. In the US, most foreign cars can't be legally imported unless they're at least 25 years old. Doesn't matter if they're iconic, rare, or in perfect condition, if they weren't built to US safety and emission standards, they're off limits. That's why models like the Nissan Skyline GTR or certain Land Rover Defenders were banned for decades. If Customs finds one that's too young, they can literally seize and crush it. The law came in during the late 80s after European luxury cars started flooding in through unofficial channels. Automakers pushed back hard, and the rule passed. Other countries aren't nearly as strict. Canada uses a 15-year limit. In places like the UK and New Zealand, you can import almost anything as long as it passes inspection or meets tax rules. In fact, in most countries, if a car runs and it's road safe, you're good. 17. Ackee Fruit. Ackee might be Jamaica's national fruit, but here in the US, it is treated more like a controlled substance. It's not for sale in its fresh form at any grocery store. And if you try bringing it through customs, they will take it away on the spot. The danger comes down to how ripe it is. Things only get risky if you jump the gun. Unripe ackee packs a toxin that messes with blood sugar and can lead to what's known as Jamaican vomiting sickness. Hence, the FDA banned all ackee imports for decades. In 2000, they finally eased up, but only for canned or frozen ackee that's been tested to make sure toxin levels are below 100 parts per million. Fresh ackee remains completely banned to this day. 16. Haggis. If you don't know what haggis is, don't worry. Not everyone grew up on Mike Myers movies and deep-cut Scottish references. It's basically a crumbly, spicy mix of sheep organs, oats, and spices, traditionally cooked inside a stomach. And in Scotland, it's a big deal. Like national dish, bagpipes in the background level, big deal. But if you want the real version here in the US, good luck. The USDA banned lungs from all food back in 1971, saying they could carry fluids or contaminants that made them unsafe to eat, and, well, you won't find good haggis without it. Scotland's been trying to change America's mind for years, but, well, we haven't budged. So if you want the real thing, you'll have to fly for it. Preferably while quoting a few lines from So I Married an Axe Murderer. 15. Raw milk French cheeses. There's a whole category of dreamy, creamy French cheeses that just never make it onto US charcuterie boards. Brie de Meaux, Camembert de Normandie, raw milk chèvre, the real stuff, not the supermarket knockoffs wrapped in plastic and pasteurized into sadness. We're stuck in this bit of silliness because of a law enacted in the 40s. In the US, if a cheese is made with raw milk, it has to be aged at least 60 days before it can be sold. That knocks out most soft cheeses, which usually age for just 3 to 4 weeks. The FDA keeps the rule in place because of listeria concerns, but a lot of people say it's overkill. Interestingly, in Europe, everyone's been eating these exact same cheeses for centuries, and they're still fine. 14. Psilocybin magic mushrooms. Psilocybin, the compound found in psychedelic mushrooms, is considered a Schedule I drug under US federal law. That means it's in the same legal category as heroin and LSD. Even a small amount can lead to serious felony charges, and selling or growing them is treated as a major offense. In places like Jamaica, psilocybin mushrooms were never outlawed, and over time the country became known for legal retreats that offer guided sessions for visitors. Brazil, Nepal, and the Bahamas also don't have bans on naturally occurring psychedelics. Then again, in the Netherlands, psilocybin truffles are legal to buy, even though dried mushrooms aren't. A few US cities like Denver and Seattle have started decriminalizing personal use, but at the federal level, nothing's changed. 13. Cannabis. You can walk into a licensed shop in Toronto, buy marijuana legally, and head home without raising an eyebrow. Try crossing the border with that same product, though, and US Customs will confiscate it and possibly charge you with a federal crime. That's the weird middle ground marijuana occupies in the US. It's fully legal in over 20 states, with more allowing medical use, but it's banned at the federal level. Even banks can get into trouble for working with dispensaries. Canada made national legalization official in 2018. Uruguay did it even earlier, creating a regulated system where cannabis is tracked from grower to pharmacy. Malta and South Africa have both moved toward legalization or decriminalization as well. The US federal stance is gradually softening, but it's kind of ironic that the US spearheaded the war on drugs that criminalized cannabis, even as some allies now treat it like a legal commodity. 12. Prostitution. In Berlin, it's a taxed job. In Amsterdam, it's got its own district with glass windows and nightly foot traffic. Yet, with the exception of a few rural counties in Nevada, sex work is banned across the country. Now, this is a loaded subject, and I'm obviously not taking a stance for or against it, but it needs to be said that countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and New Zealand have legalized prostitution and built regulatory systems around it. Workers can register, get health checks, and in many cases, access labor rights and insurance. And it's not just legal systems that differ. It's the entire framework. One side treats it like employment, the other treats it like a crime. And that split affects everything from safety to stigma. 11. Polygamy. Polygamy, meaning being married to more than one person at a time, is illegal in all 50 states. These laws date back to the 1800s when they were first introduced to crack down on Mormon plural marriages. In contrast, about 58 countries, mostly in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, legally recognize polygamous marriages. In places like Indonesia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa, it is completely legal for a man to have multiple wives, either under Islamic law or long-standing cultural traditions. These marriages are fully recognized by the state, with rights and legal protections to match. Even in some parts of Europe and North America, authorities won't necessarily pursue charges against people in polygamous unions that were formed in other countries. They won't officially recognize the marriage, but they won't throw you in jail for it either. 10. Absinthe. The real thing has been off limits locally thanks to a compound called thujone. The ban was driven by the belief that thujone, found in wormwood, could cause hallucinations or even insanity. In parts of Europe, especially Switzerland and the Czech Republic, absinthe never really left, and they kept the original wormwood-heavy recipes alive. The US sort of lifted its ban in 2007, but only under strict conditions. To be legal here, absinthe has to be labeled thujone-free, meaning it contains less than 10 parts per million. You also can't slap any trippy artwork or psychedelic claims on the label. And if a bottle shows up from abroad without following those rules, customs will seize it. 9. DDT. Once a go-to insecticide, DDT was banned in 1972 after researchers linked it to serious environmental damage, especially in birds. It caused their eggshells to thin and almost wiped out species like the bald eagle. It also liked to hang around in the food chain for far too long. The global story is a bit more complicated. In regions where malaria continues to kill by the thousands, like parts of Africa and South Asia, DDT remains on the front lines. Governments can legally spray it indoors thanks to exceptions built into international agreements. In their minds, the immediate threat of disease outweighs the long-term risk of the chemical. 8. Cyclamate artificial sweetener. Cyclamate is one of those old-school sweeteners that got the boot in the US decades ago and just never came back. The FDA pulled it off the market in 1970 after a controversial study linked larger doses to bladder cancer in lab rats. That study has been wildly discredited in the meantime, but well, the ban stuck. Other parts of the world moved on. Cyclamate is legal in over 100 countries, including Canada, Australia, and most of Europe. In fact, Canadian Sweet and Low still uses Cyclamate, while the US version switched to saccharin. In the EU, you'll spot it in everything from sugar-free gum to soft drinks. It's especially popular in countries that prefer a softer taste than saccharin's bitter finish. 7. Coca Leaves. In countries like Peru and Bolivia, coca leaves are sold at market stalls like mint or chamomile. People chew them for energy, sip cocoa tea to help with altitude, and even hand them out to tourists stepping off the plane in Cuzco. It's a daily ritual, not a drug. But US law doesn't make that distinction. Because cocoa leaves contain trace amounts of the same alkaloid used to make cocaine, they're classified as a controlled substance. Even cocoa candies can get you in trouble at the border. In the meantime, Bolivia won a special exemption from international drug treaties so that it could preserve its cultural right to use cocoa leaves. The US never followed suit. 6. Public drinking, or alcohol containers in public. It doesn't matter if it's a beer, a cocktail, or just half a hard seltzer. Once it is open and visible, that's a problem. Laws like these are holdovers from an older mindset that equated drinking in public with disorderly conduct. And to be fair, not a lot has changed. But even if you are totally calm, walking through a park with a drink could still land you a ticket. Other places don't see it the same way. Wine with a picnic, a beer at a bus stop, nobody bats an eye. And people are trusted to be responsible. These laws never caught on everywhere, and in many cities, they weren't part of the culture to begin with. That same can of beer might mean a quiet stroll or a run-in with law enforcement. It really just depends on where you're standing. 5. Horse meat. You won't see horse meat on any grocery shelf or restaurant menu around here, and there's a reason for that. The government doesn't technically ban eating it, but it does block all funding for slaughterhouse inspections. Without inspections, no butcher is touching it. Horse meat, on the other hand, is just another option on the menu in countries like France, Japan, and Kazakhstan. Montreal has horse sausages. Tokyo serves it raw, thinly sliced, and dipped in soy sauce. The American bloc comes down to how horses are viewed. Here, there are companions, pets, show animals, and even sports stars. Other countries never made that same leap, which is why a steak that's perfectly normal in Brussels would never fly in Boston. 4. Laetrile. Apricot pits might sound harmless, but one of their extracts, called Laetrile, caused a major stir in the 70s when people started claiming it could cure cancer. It was branded as vitamin B17, even though it's not a real vitamin, and promoted as a miracle treatment. The problem was that it didn't work, and worse, it could release cyanide when broken down in the body. After several poisonings and no clinical proof of effectiveness, the FDA stepped in and shut it down. That didn't stop demand, though. Clinics popped up in Tijuana offering Laetrile therapy to desperate patients from the US. It continues to be sold in parts of Mexico and Asia today, usually outside formal medicine, where it's treated more like an underground supplement. 3. Kinder Surprise chocolate eggs. What could possibly go wrong if you add a tiny little toy to a chocolate egg? Well, apparently a lot, at least according to US regulators. Kinder Surprise eggs have been banned for years because the toy is hidden inside the chocolate, and that breaks the rule against putting non-edible items inside food. It's meant to prevent choking hazards for little kids, even though the toy comes sealed in a big plastic capsule, and even though most of the world seems to handle it just fine. Customs has actually seized thousands of these from travelers' bags, and the fines can get ridiculous. But take a step across the border, and it's not unusual to see shelves full of them at every checkout. 2. Cuban Cigars. Cuban cigars have a long history of being contraband for Americans. Not because of what they contain, but because of where they come from. Thanks to the US embargo against Cuba that kicked off in 1962, it became flat out illegal to buy, import, or even possess a Cuban cigar, no matter where you got it. So while the rest of the world was lighting up cohibas like they were just another luxury indulgence, Americans were sneaking them back from Europe in socks and suitcases. We did have a short-lived window in 2016 where you could legally bring some back for personal use, but that door slammed shut again in 2020. These days, you still can't import Cuban cigars commercially, and truth be told, you're not supposed to bring them back at all. 1. Sex toys. Some states. You can legally walk into a pharmacy in Paris or a department store in Tokyo and buy a sex toy without anyone batting an eye. But until recently, that same purchase could land you in trouble in Alabama. In 1998, Alabama passed a law that made it a crime to sell any device meant to stimulate the genitals. And no, that's not a punchline. When the law was challenged in court, the state Supreme Court upheld it, and similar restrictions soon popped up in places like Mississippi and Texas too. Which means an item that's casually sold in a London department store was, for years, more controversial in parts of the US than a semi-automatic rifle. Just let that one sit for a second. And that's a wrap. Which one felt the most ridiculous to you? Leave your pick in the comments below. I'm keeping tabs. But, trivia time real quick. What decade saw the US bring in that soft cheese law? The one that bans all the good stuff, like Brie de Meaux and Camembert Verde and Normandie. Was it A, the 1920s, B, the 1940s, C, the 1960s, or D, the 1980s? You know what to do. And if you like today's list, well, there's another list I did that is just as ludicrous. And it's about the loopholes people used and actually got away with. Like the guy who moved into a mansion for less than the price of a pizza. Or a dad who claimed a piece of land just to make his daughter a princess. You'll find that video if you click on the link right here. I know it'll pop up anytime now. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to hit those buttons and I'll see you again next time. Like, share, comment, subscribe. You know the deal. Let's do it. Love you guys. See you later.